right here has become the most divisive thing on the earth right now.
I've got to put my 16-year-old son with a face covering on? I don't think so.
That's what America is all about. It's all about individualism.
When something is being imposed by the government, that touches deeply feelings about individual freedom that roots in some of the founding ideas of the United States.
Mask or no mask? It's an argument Americans have been having since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. Most doctors and scientists insist masks prevent the spread of the virus, but some politicians and citizens remain skeptical. And while this fight feels new, it's actually not. Something similar happened 100 years ago.
The history of mask wearing really begins in the second wave of the 1918 influenza pandemic. And so that's the deadliest wave. It's the fall wave. That's really when mask orders and even recommendations to wear masks starts to take off.
Wearing masks became a common practice among surgeons in Europe in the late 1800s, where doctors wore them to protect themselves from patients' respiratory droplets. The 1918 to 1919 flu pandemic took that practice outside of the operating room for the first time. It was the most deadly flu outbreak in history. At least 50 million people died worldwide, with around 675,000 deaths in the US. During this time, masks were recommended in Northeast cities, but mask wearing in public was mandatory in Western cities like San Francisco, Seattle, and Denver.
The typical mask was a surgical mask of the time, which was made out of 4, sometimes 6 plies of surgical gauze. It was pretty porous material. These were manufactured by a number of companies. They were also made by a bunch of Red Cross volunteers across the nation. But in many cases, the ordinance didn't stipulate what type of mask had to be worn. It just had to be a face covering, similar to what we see today. Chiffon face masks were made, for example, for the more fashion-conscious people. There were definitely significant numbers of people who pushed back and who refused to wear their masks, or who were caught without masks temporarily, perhaps letting it dangle or removing it, taking it down to take a bite to eat or something like that. And we have reports from pretty much every city that issued these mandatory mask orders of, in some cases, hundreds of people being arrested. San Francisco is a prime example of that. The city police chief had to notify the health officer and the mayor that they needed to stop enforcing the mandatory mask ordinance because his jail cells were filling up with people who were caught without their masks as they were awaiting arraignment before a judge.
For some residents, San Francisco's requirement to wear a mask was so unpopular that in 1919, a group of dissidents decided to organize.
So at least 2,000 people meet in January of 1919 to form the Anti-Mask League. And they have this mass protest, this rally inside of an auditorium where they listen to speeches from prominent physicians about why masks are not effective, from legal experts who say that it's unconstitutional, and just from people who believe that the government doesn't have a right to tell them what to do. We see not only several prominent physicians, but one of the members of the County Board of Supervisors is actually part of this Anti-Mask League. So these are quite prominent people in the community.
As new cases continued to decline and opposition to mask wearing increased, the officials of San Francisco ended mandatory mask wearing in February of 1919.
People are sick, people are dying.
I'm an American, and I feel like I should be able to do what I want to.
But while Americans bickered, Asian countries, including Japan, were quick to adopt mask wearing.
The Japanese in 1918, 1920, when the pandemic was raging around the world, were unusually enthusiastic about cosmopolitan ideas. The mask came to the Japanese public at that time not simply as an imposition of the government, but as a sign of modernity. By the post-World War II years, in the 60s in particular, the Japanese government is saying, no, it's more important for you to get your vaccine. But people clung to mask wearing. So at a certain point, the mask seems to have broken free from particular, public health initiatives and become something about personal space, about style even. And the term in Japanese for wearing a mask, call it a sort of a chic mask or a mask for style.
In Japan today, wearing masks is pretty common in winter to protect against the flu and in spring against pollen hay fever. Japan has had one of the lowest COVID-19 mortality rates of developed nations. Many believe it's because in Japan, it is perfectly normal to wear a mask.
The custom of wearing masks has spread with very little encouragement from the government. It's just being taken for granted that it was a sensible protective measure.
I think that we need to get past that rugged American individualism in this pandemic because we're all in this together. It's not just about protecting yourself, it's about protecting all of society.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.